this thing behind me closer. I'd rather stand about right here. While he's doing that, back when I was a much younger and you may have to move it a piece of time. Back when I was much younger and much more deluded about my future, I said to my dad once, I said, if I ever get to write my own autobiography, one of the titles of the chapters is going to be Different Colored Walls. And the reason is because he had been asking me about things that were going on in my life that were not working. And I knew they weren't working, but I was having a conversation with my dad about things not working, and so I was being just a little sarcastic. And basically, it's great. Thank you. Basically, what I told him was, I just want to bang my head against a different colored wall for a little while. You know, it's just like, this isn't working. I know this won't work either, but it's a different colored wall. And we've all had that feeling of, I've tried everything, nothing is working, I'm running out of options, I don't know what to do. It's, you know, you're panicky, you feel powerless, it can spin you into a depression, you're anxious all the time, you just know that other people are watching you flounder. I hate that feeling. And no one really knows what you're going through either. Because like when you are, you know, they think they know what you're going through, and so they offer you advice. But what you're really thinking in your head is, you do not know what you're talking about. If you could see what I'm seeing, you don't know how bad the finances are. You don't know what kind of war zone my house is. You don't know what kind of relationship me and my wife has. You don't know anything about those awful coworkers. If you could see what I see, you would not be telling me what you're telling me. So you wouldn't talk like that. So we're going to see the disciples right in the middle of that kind of frustration in a few minutes, but we're going to back up. For now, in terms of what I teach for the next 3 weeks, probably just from Mark. Because when we started the Saturday night group, we've been slowly working our way through Mark, and I just decided to stick there. So Mark chapter 9 is where we'll be for just a couple minutes. Before launching into the second half of his story, before Mark emphasizes this long, arduous trip to the cross, we get one final, absolutely stunning picture of the glory of Jesus. Verse 2 says this, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let's make 3 tents, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. By the way, what he's really saying is let's make 3 tabernacles, because he's looking for shelter. The reason that the Old Testament people made the tabernacle and made the temple was to protect them from the presence of God. And so that's what he's doing here. He's like, I am freaking out. I'm scared. We got to build something to protect us from your presence. He did not know what to say, verse 6, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. So the disciples have seen pretty amazing things. They've seen miracles. They've seen demons cast out. They've seen Jesus putting the Pharisees in their place. Just days earlier, Peter said, you're the Christ. And so they knew Jesus was amazing, but this was new. And I love how Mark describes this. Scholars tell us that Mark wrote Mark probably based on personal interviews with Peter. So after a few years, several years actually, he's recalling this moment of glory, and after pondering it for years, this is what he comes up with. Even Jesus' clothes were intensely white, like no bleach I've ever seen. It just strikes me as an infomercial. I don't know what Peter is thinking here. I think that it was just so amazing. He's like, I've thought about it for years. This is all I got. It's like really bleached. I don't know. That's just it. But what I guess happened, and what it says happened, is that Jesus glowed with such radiance and power that his clothes lit up as well. That's pretty intense. This is sun off the snow brightness. This is a tiny, tiny piece of the full glory of Jesus being revealed. Tiny, tiny little piece. This is the story Peter, James, and John have heard dozens of times come to life. This is Moses on the mountain. If you know the story, Moses goes up to the mountain to get the Ten Commandments, and he comes down and his face is glowing. But see, his face is glowing because it's being reflected. He's like the moon. Jesus is not reflecting any glory. He's producing glory. And so he is the sun. Jesus is, this is not just sun off the snow brightness. This is staring into the sun. The fact that Peter, James, and John stayed upright and did not need a change of clothes is amazing. That's what I'm trying to get across to y'all. They saw just a tiny, tiny, Jesus just like took the curtain and went, boop, see? And they just went nuts. That's what they saw. And Peter does kind of babble here. We talked about that. And then a cloud, which represents the glory of God, overshadows the mountain, and God's voice speaks. Now again, we're retelling the story of Moses. When God's voice spoke on the mountain back then, all the people went, don't let that ever happen again. We do not want to hear that voice. We do not want to see fire on top of them. We do not. Moses, you go talk to that guy, and then you tell us what he said. Right? So, but this is what happens. God's power overshadows the mountain, and he says, this is my son. I love him. Listen to him. So they're all in the presence of God. Jesus is there. Elijah is there. Moses is there. Peter, James, and John are standing nearby going, oh. And the presence of God is all around them, and none of them die. Then, just as suddenly as all this apparently happened, it's gone. Elijah and Moses are gone. Jesus is left standing because Jesus is about to provide what they could not. But everything is just sort of disappearing. It's like just Jesus sort of powering down. I don't know how that works. And the three disciples are just picking their jaws up off the ground. And I just see Peter going, James, did you just see? We're still alive, man. I mean, you got to get the picture. I'm trying to paint the picture of just how amazing, how intense, and how glorious this was. Tim Keller is a pastor up in New York, and he writes that the disciples are left standing there blinking in a state of electrified wonder. I love that image. And I don't know what happened. I don't know how long they stayed up there in the afterglow, but pretty soon they start making their way down the mountain. And from a distance, they begin to hear quite a ruckus, arguing going on at the foot of the mountain, just like when Moses came down from the mountain. But here's what happens next. We're going to pick it up in verse 14. And I'm going to provide some parentheses because the pronouns get confusing. And when they, Peter, James, and John, and Jesus, came to the disciples, they, Peter, James, and John, disciples, or Jesus, saw a great crowd around them, the other 9. There's a great crowd gathered around the other 9 disciples. And scribes were arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, the other 9, Jesus asked the other 9, what are you arguing about with them? What are you arguing about with the crowd? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. And he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw him, Jesus, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And the father said, From childhood. And has often cast him into the fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." And immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. Now Jesus was in absolute control all the time. Nothing ever happened that took him by surprise. And the disciples, Peter, James, and John, are probably still just dumbfounded. Actually skipped some verses, but on the way down the mountain, Jesus said to Peter, and James, and John, "I'm going to die, and then I'm going to rise from the dead." So they're trying to figure out the mountain. They're trying to figure out the glory. They're trying to figure out what in the world he means by rise from the dead. Their finite little minds are just on overload from what they'd seen. And then they descend into this messy situation. So have you ever been in an intensely emotional situation and your mind is working but your body won't? Have you ever been in that situation where it's like the words are there? You can imagine yourself saying stuff that's brilliant and awesome and is going to handle the situation completely well, but your mouth doesn't work? That's kind of what struck me as I studied this passage. Because what does this scene, this whole situation, this demon-possessed boy, this argument going on back and forth between all the people, what does this look like from Peter, James, and John's eyes? And here's what I came up with. If you could see what we saw, you would not be saying what you're saying. You would not be staying where you are. If you could see what we just saw, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing right now. And I got to thinking, if we could put words in Peter's mouth, he'd be looking at the father of this demon-possessed boy going, "Did you really just say to Jesus, if you can do anything?" Seriously, if you could see what I just saw, you would know that Jesus could take on a whole swarm of demons, open up a big old can of whoop thrash, take care of them things, and not break a sweat. Seriously, do you really, if you could see what I saw, you would not be asking if Jesus could do something. And then he would look at the 9 disciples and he would say to them, see, if you actually could cast that demon out, you got to understand, if you could see what we just saw, this ain't your power. He may let you use it, but this ain't yours. This is not ours to just play with. This is not ours to take credit for. Y'all just, shh. you just quiet, because this is not, what is the matter with you? And then, if he could talk to the crowd, I think that he would honestly say, "Hey, wait a minute. Why is everybody not on their faces right now? In fact, James, get down. Why are we not on our faces right now? That's Jesus. Do you remember what we just saw? If you could see what we saw, everything would be different." Does it make sense? I just had this picture of Peter going, if you could see what we just saw, you'd quit arguing and you'd just worship. You just fall on your face and go, "I'm not worthy to be here." That is one role of this book. Dozens of authors, thousands of stories, all of them are shouting, if you could see what we saw, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. If you could see what we saw, you wouldn't feel as hopeless as you do. You wouldn't be considering that sin. You would be full of joy. You would be worshiping. You wouldn't have a stitch of self-consciousness about you. If you could see what we saw, Paul would say, if you could see what I saw, you would know his grace is enough. James would say, if you could see what I saw, you just wouldn't worry about stuff so much. You would trust that there is wisdom from God. Peter would say, if you could see what I saw, you wouldn't spend days wallowing in self-pity. You'd run to him for restoration and forgiveness. See, Scripture shows us the absolute truth about God. Everything in here is true, whether we like it or not, agree with it or not, obey it or not. It's just there. And it's there to remind us this is who he is and this is who we are. So take this one transfiguration experience into the lives of these three disciples. John, years from now, is going to be alone on an island, exiled. And he is about to receive another picture of the glory of Jesus. But when he's sitting there by himself, wondering, what in the world am I doing here? That same Jesus that he saw on the mountain, still the same Jesus. Peter is going to sit across a fire from Jesus, days after denying that he even knows him. The same Jesus that he saw glorified on the mountain is the one sitting across from him. The same God that said, this is my son, I love him, listen to him, is the one that Peter needs to be reminded about. Because if he was reminded of that, then he doesn't sit across from him with such shame and such guilt. And when James is sitting in a jail cell about to be beheaded, that happens in Acts, years later, Jesus is still washed in light. He's still glorious. And if he could remember or see what he saw, he would face his death differently. This is one of the roles of Scripture. This is who God is. This is who we are. Every time you pick this up, every time you sing a song, every time you pray, every time you minister, every time you gather together with another believer, every time you speak Jesus, what you're reminding yourself of is, this is who he is, this is who I am. So let's pick up on one last piece of the story. Verse 33 says this. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me. So my question was, how on earth, in a few days, do you get from, oh my gosh, we need to build shelters because we need to protect ourselves from the holy presence of God, oh my gosh, he's glowing, oh my gosh, whatever. How do you get in days from that to, yeah, but I'm the greatest? And I'll tell you how. We are all gospel amnesiacs. You know, at some point, at some level, you know who God is. You know that he's mighty. You know he's awesome. You know he's lovely. You know he's almighty. You know he's great. You know he's loving. But in the crush of events, in the messiness of just being human, we forget it. Which is why it is so important that we learn to speak Jesus to ourselves and to the needs around us. That is the role of the church, of ministry, of service, of mission, of prayer, of reading. All of it is that. We need this gospel over and over and over and over. We cannot make God appear. I wish we could. But we can know who he is so that when he does reveal himself, we can remember and we can think, wow, you are amazing. So here's the role of the church. Here's the role of the Bible. Here's the role that I'm talking about. You ever been to a really, really good restaurant? Why did you go to the really, really good restaurant? Probably because you heard it's a really good restaurant, right? So you're thinking to yourself, somebody said this has got the best steaks ever, and the service is just outstanding. And so then you go to the restaurant, and it is, I mean, the steak just melts in your mouth, and the people are also polite and happy, and you think to yourself, wow. Now let me ask you a question. Have you received any new information? No. You're just experiencing it firsthand. That's what we're talking about. We hear God loves you. And we need to hear it over and over and over and over again. We hear God forgives you. We hear there's a new start. We hear all of those things. But we need to hear them over and over and over again until they finally break through and we go, yes, that's right. Let me give you one other story just because it's funny. I like it anyway. I have been on one blind date in my entire life. We went and saw the first Batman. Michael Keaton Batman. I'm dating myself here. But y'all remember Michael Keaton Batman? Michael Keaton Batman, Kim Basinger. Right? That was the date. And my friend who set up the date said, you're really going to like her. She looks like Kim Basinger. I thought, all right, cool. Because I'm just a little nerdy guy. This is awesome. I can go out with Kim Basinger. This is awesome. And then he said, and I told her that you look like Pierce Brosnan. To which I said, okay, so how much less than Kim Basinger does she really look like? Okay? But so we went to the date. We met at the movie theater. It was a special showing for JCPenney employees because we were promoting the movie. It was the morning of the opening, so I was one of the first people in all the country to see the new Batman. And so me and my buddy Mike are out in the lobby getting popcorn or whatever, and he's like, huh? What do you think? What do you think? Nudging me in the ribs. And I looked at him and I said, call me Pierce. Because she was gorgeous. She was really pretty. So again, I'm asking you, did I get any new information? Nope. He told me she was pretty. He told me she was stunning. He told me lots of things about her. Then I experienced it firsthand. That's what this is about. That's what speaking Jesus is about. That's what the church is about. It's reminding one another. It's Travis and Nicole in a hospital room, powerless, sitting by the bedside. It's reminding them that God is bigger than this. It's reminding everyone that there is a fresh start. There's a new start. I'm not saying we need mountaintop experiences all the time. I'm saying we need the truths of the mountaintop and the valley and the boring journey in between. We need to remember that the God we have seen is no different today when I lost my job than he was months ago when I was in high cotton. The God that is revealed is no different today when I'm brokenhearted than I was months ago when I'm full of joy because of circumstances. If you could see what I saw, you wouldn't stay where you are. By God's grace, will be what we do with NewStart. If you could see what I see, you wouldn't miss the next 3 weeks. You wouldn't miss the 8 weeks. You wouldn't miss next Easter. It's already forming in my head with hope. By the grace of God, we will get to stand here, wherever it is here is, for however long here is, but we will get to stay and stand and declare, if you could see what we saw, it'll change everything. See, instead of different colored walls to bang your head against, imagine different pictures, different truths of who God is, who Jesus is, what he's done. Imagine those being spoken to over and over and over and over. That change things. I'm going to pray. We're going to eat. We're going to figure out instructions on how we're going to do all that. God, thank you for images and pictures and stories and experiences of who you are. Thank you that you are always bigger than we need you to be. Thank you that you love me more than I will ever experience. Until I'm face to face with you, that is. Thank you that you have more power than we possibly could ever need. Just pray and ask that you would see fit to allow this to become a place and a platform from which we could say to people, if you could see what we saw, it would change everything. And I pray and ask that you would reveal yourself so that lots of people could see what we see. We ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. There's dinner in there. I don't know how that's going to work.